Is there anyone that hasn't spoken that would like the opportunity to do so?
Are we just still on ACIL? I'm quite
ACIL,
confused,
yeah, that's right, and we need to make much more progress if we're going to get through. Councillor Clow.
I haven't spoken because I've only spoken to an amendment which I've subsequently withdrawn. Point number 22, which is in the next section, but bear with me. The second sentence there. In addition, AT should ensure the statement of intent is forward-looking, as some sections report on past success. You need to add a word rather than identifying and pursuing emerging issues and opportunities. Should that be something that should be over in proposed shareholder comments applicable to all CCOs? Because, I mean, we're trying to go forward here. We don't really want to have a history lesson all the damn time.
Yep.
You know, we really need to be talking about forward thinking, forward planning. How can we clean up the transport mess, the water mess, you know, whatever. It's no point recounting history about we've underinvested and oh dear. So is that something that should be incorporated in a positive way to all of the CCOs?
I think that if you look through the document that we have in front of us, you will see from time to time CCOs, including ATEED, have been they've had it suggested to them that they need to cut the detail and the history lessons and look in a more forward-looking way. So I think that point you're making is relevant, and that will be taken on board in relation to our comments. Okay. Any further discussion?
All CCOs is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah. It applies equally, I think, across all of them. Okay. If there are no further,
a very small technical point.
Councillor Fletcher.
Could I just ask Alistair? We all know that public notification is changing and the needs of the community change. Where board meetings will be advertised on the council's website through the public notices of the New Zealand Herald, why just the New Zealand Herald? I mean, most of my constituents probably just get, a lot of them just get their local newspapers. Could you give me some advice on why New Zealand Herald?
That's ACIL's choice. We just require them to publicly notify their meetings. How they choose to do that's up to them, but we can discuss that with them if it's on our website.
I just think it's something that we need to be thinking about for the future, so just, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Suggest that we now move on to the second of our CCOs, Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development. Edward, can you make some preliminary comments on that?
Yes, the ATEED draft statement of intent, as was just discussed, is very detailed, and we're urging them to focus on the future rather than their past successes. We'd like a clearer statement of ATEED's role and contribution to Auckland's economic success, a stronger commitment to cooperate within the council group, and also be clearer about how ATEED is cooperating externally, such as with central government agencies, including MFAT, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, so on. We'd like ATEED to provide increased detail about their spending in different cost categories or activity areas, and more explanation again about performance indicators and why the targets for some indicators have been set as they have.
Great, thank you very much, Edward. Are there any comments from councillors that you'd like to have incorporated into the ATEED statement of intent and our officials' comments on it?
Just
Councillor Cashmore.
yes, thanks. I think you were at the workshop we had with ATEED, Alistair or Edward, and one of the things the chairman of their board and CEO stated was their movement towards more funding of ATEED from outside sources, and I wonder if that should be signalled in the SOI as well.
Any response on that? I see that they have absorbed the idea that if they could be funded other than by direct funding of from council, they would welcome that. But it could be built in. Discussions that I've had with ATEED build in the expectation that they become increasingly self-funding over time.
base without flicking through the 50-odd pages of ATED's SOI. I suspect there is something in there about that, but we can definitely double-check that, Councillor.
There's a section in regard to targeted rates on accommodation, but maybe we should broaden that as an objective.
Yes, okay,
That's what
noted.
I'm getting at, Mr Mayor.
Yep, I think good suggestion. Councillor Simpson, Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Worship. Actually, that was where I was coming from too, really. Just a signal around performance targets, highlighting that we know as at the workshop they have agreed to begin looking at a self-funding model. But in this particular annual statement of intent, maybe highlighting the benefit to the residential ratepayer who contributes to what they do too. I mean, that's been a bit of a contentious issue, so.
That's a high bar to jump.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, and I apologise for not being at the workshop yesterday. I was at a board meeting all day, but I've been to many, in fact chaired most of the CCO workshops. On ATED, I'm very keen that we do pick up on the less is more approach. It certainly is a long and historical document. However, I'm suggesting, Mr Mayor, that we don't lose the ability to explain what AT does, because as witnessed in the debate over the last few months, there's a chronic lack of understanding about what AT does out there in the real world, amongst the media and around this table. So I think we just need to have a pithy and clear explanation, because it certainly isn't all about visitor attraction. In fact, that's just a small percentage of what they do.
Yep. I think the view is more would be less in helping the clarity of that explanation.
Exactly.
Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, Mr Chairman, just want to follow up on what the comments made by the Deputy Mayor. And I do recall that in 2014, I believe, this council actually adopted a policy for seeking further commercial sponsorship. And that was, I thought, specifically aimed at ATED. And I'm not exactly sure if they've accomplished anything under that directive from council, apart from now clearly wanting to sock it to the accommodation sector. So I don't know. This was specifically around sponsorship, naming rights, and a whole bunch of different things that they could be engaged in. And I don't believe that they've really delivered on that, and perhaps, you know, I agree that if it's in the statement of intent, it should be followed up, and we need to pursue that. I also think that we need ATED to be a lot more transparent in their spending and in terms of their outcomes, because it's kind of always lost on me exactly what ATED have actually accomplished that couldn't have been accomplished by the business sector themselves in many cases.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the concept of commercial sponsorship is consistent with the comments made by the Deputy Mayor about greater self-funding. And I think transparency in spending and outcomes is what we need from all CCOs, but maybe in particular this one. What I find with this document, talking to officials, is that credit seems to have been taken from the growth in the visitor industry overall without trying to separate out the specific and direct impact that ATEDers have. And I think they have had in areas. They've helped make us a destination rather than a gateway. Yep. But it tends to become, if I go back to Councillor Hulse's point, a little confused because you're talking about the macro development of the visitor industry in Auckland rather than the specific input and outcomes of ATED activities. So I think if you could build that into your comments, there'd be some support for that. Okay, Councillor Clough.
I just want to comment, we shouldn't forget really this quite sterling job ATED have done on economic development. I mean, we seem to focus on, you know, Adele or this or whatever, but I mean, it's economic development enhancement has been fairly successful, and from what I can gather through feedback from industry is they're pretty damn happy with what ATED has done to help them facilitate and lead, etc., etc. So I'll just make that point.
Oh, I don't think that's...
Thank you, councillor.
ATED
Any
didn't bring
further
ATED.
comments from anybody? Councillor Hills?
Yes, thank you. I think just probably brief, when we're throwing out these discussions and we are talking, do more with less and things, or
Only providing a
target what
facility,
people do,
that's all.
then we need to talk about what we don't want them to do. So is it the Lantern Festival? Is it Diwali? Is it the Young Enterprise Scheme? Is it Job Fest? Is it Grid Auckland? Is it Build Auckland? Is it all the other programs and things we're talking about? All their KPIs, when we're discussing these things in the open, we need to discuss, we ask them to increase visitor numbers. Whether they can claim that all their own is a different story to the fact that visitor numbers have increased. Whether we, all the other things around GDP and startups and negotiations they've been doing, which we've asked them to do, we need to be clear about whether we're congratulating them for doing the things we asked them to do, or we stop asking them to do that and expect either someone else do that or it doesn't happen at all. So I just think we need to be very clear about, we can keep throwing out do more with less or define what you do better, but what do we not want them to do?
Yeah.
And how do we get them to do
I
those
wasn't
things?
sending 11 people to San Francisco, that's for bloody sure.
I think that's a fair point. I haven't heard any suggestion around the table that they not do things like Diwali and Lantern Festival, which I think they do really effectively.
Perhaps they shouldn't send 11 people to San Francisco, however.
Well,
I think that's unfair, Mr. Mayor.
yeah, okay. We
That's
won't.
completely
Let's keep our
Everywhere
debate
else.
focused, or we won't get through the workload that we have to do today. Any further suggestions in regard to statement of intent? Okay, we'll move on, and our next one is Auckland Transport, I think, isn't it?
Yep.
Auckland Transport. Edward.
Thank you again. Yes, as was discussed earlier, the Auckland Transport Statement of Intent, one of our key comments is the need for it to become more future focused, with a lot more detail about the coming year's activities included, and a good example of that is in their work plan table, which is very light on what's happening in 2017, 2018. We want clearer information about where money is being spent so that the public can really understand where the money's going. And in terms of the work plan, make revisions to it to make it much clearer what the priority projects are and the different size of the projects. An increased commitment to collaboration across the council group needs to be included, particularly in terms of projects such as the City Centre Master Plan and across the other CCOs such as Pānuku, and there's a corresponding comment in the Pānuku comments that we'll come to later. And additionally, more details to be provided on specific projects and how they'll deliver the positive outcomes for Auckland. And there's a long list of projects we've suggested in our draft comments, including in relation to the roads and streets framework, mass rapid transit, bus initiatives, rail trip times, and the cycling program.
Thank you very much, Edward. I think the comments by David Hopkins probably reflected pretty much the report you'd written. It does need to be more specific, greater clarity. I think most of us that sat around the same table that heard AT do an outline of what they were intending to do felt that that was more instructive than the statement of intent. I've had that discussion already with Auckland Transport, and I think they'll take that on board. But I'm happy for further comments. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I want to echo the comment there in relation to commitment to collaboration. I think that's very important. You've highlighted projects such as the City Centre Master Plan, but I really want to reiterate the spatial priority area work streams as well. And Your Worship, you and I have had conversations with staff from your office in relation to the spatial priority area work that's taking place in my ward, and there are decisions taken by Auckland Transport on a business case that appears to completely cut across that. Now, I'm not trying to get myself involved in micromanaging the operational decisions of a road controlling authority, but I don't see that there is a lot of complementary work streams going on if we can have business cases which completely cut across the SPAs. So I would want to see that addressed in comments back to Auckland Transport, but I would also want to see officer stewardship around Auckland Transport's activities that don't necessarily complement the SPA program, because to me the SPA work is driven out of the unitary plan, which I would have thought would be a foundation document not only for the shareholder but also for Auckland Transport as a subsidiary.
Thank you. So about prioritisation in particular.
Of the SPAs.
Yeah. Councillor Denise Lee.
I've got a similar collaborative theme across areas that we've identified, but specifically the transform and unlock locations that we have. So you did reference that in the next Panuku section that's highlighted, and Panuku's put wording around their being council's lead urban regeneration agency. So my question is, how is that then reflected back in the Panuku section? Forgive me if I raise it now, it sounds like it's more Panuku, but it needs to be, in my opinion, reflected in Auckland Transport. How are we reflecting back in Auckland Transport this concept of, in the transform and unlock areas, Panuku's lead agency status? Does that, and in fact, should we look at a section across Panuku and Auckland Transport, possibly water care, a section in all their documents around transform and unlock locations? Are we valuing them to the point that we need to make sure that all the dots are joined, all the T's are crossed? So I'll just leave it there, because then I have a couple of specific Panuku comments and I'll wait for that section there. But my question is, how is it reflected back in AT's documents?
I think at the moment the comment that we've made in paragraph 36, the second bullet point, could possibly be expanded to encompass that kind of sense of a greater strategic alignment across those organisations. I'd probably want to take some advice from some of my more senior colleagues at council about how that was worded, but I don't see that that's a problem in principle.
Yeah, and I think just building on actually the point raised by Councillor Newman, there's probably some issues to explore here around when a part of the council family is leading the redevelopment of an area or the work in a spatial priority area, the governance around that, because we can't have one part of the council family doing something that cuts across what everybody else is trying to achieve. So look, we'll take some advice on that. We take the point and we'll work something into the comments probably across Auckland Transport, Panuku and Water Care, but we'll think about the others as well.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. I wonder if another target that shouldn't be included, and given the presentation from David this morning, and that would be improving congestion by keeping giving targets around commute times. If we're really looking at easing congestion and making travel around the city easier, shouldn't we actually be looking at tracking that and seeing what improvements are being made over time in commuter time to various points around the city? I know that it's pretty much done elsewhere, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do that in Auckland, and that should be the job of Auckland Transport.
I've just called somebody far cleverer to the table who may be able to assist in this.
Josh. Thank you. I mean, I think the big picture is the LTP is the opportunity to do a from scratch look at, are we measuring the right things, and we will connect that into the Auckland plan, and then that will flow through into SOIs going forward. In terms of the the way congestion is currently captured in the SOI, I think I would agree with Mr Hopkins earlier and agree that it's probably too complex at the moment. The measures around productivity, you kind of need a calculator to understand. And, you know, sure, you can track whether it's going in the right direction or the wrong direction, but some clear measure around how much is congestion getting better or worse, and put in a meaningful way, because we can easily say 23% of the arterial road network suffers from level of service E or F, and it's kind of a bit meaningless, whereas I guess you could say average commutes have gone from 21 to 23 minutes over the past 2 years might be a more meaningful measure.
That's exactly what I was thinking
Totally
of.
support.
So I think we don't want to create perverse outcomes with the way that we set our targets, so we need to sort of work through it, but certainly creating something that's more meaningful to your average person on the street is a key necessary outcome going forward.
Mr Mayor, I think the average person on the street is concerned about how long it takes them to get from point A to point B, and that's exactly the kind of measurement I'm referring to.
I think there's nobody around the table that would disagree with that. I've been measuring it just this year, and I reckon it's gone up by 7 minutes, but there you go. So I think part of that's already encompassed in the pretty clear message you're sending to AT on what they need to do with their statement of intent. Of course, we can set targets, but unless we haven't got funding to provide the infrastructure to enable their achievement, it could be a rather frustrating process.
Mr Mayor, I'm not asking for a target, I'm just asking them to demonstrate whether the actions that they're taking is actually improving or not improving congestion and travel time in particular.
Yep.
Travel time is the most important thing because travel time is money to people.
Yep. They have got a section on specific routes, which is probably optimistic on page 84, but I take on board the point and we'll try and incorporate that. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to make a quick comment too, that these recommendations in here for Auckland Transport, read very well to me, very supportive, and I think they address some of the points that were raised in the public forum as well, about perhaps looking more forward-looking rather than past achievements. So I was very pleased to read those. My comment was just for you and Ross to perhaps be able to consider, just reading through Auckland Transport's statement of intent here, that just about the rural sector, Phil. There doesn't seem to be any reference there. There was in the old statement of intent just a sentence that said that there'd be some money ring fence for seal extensions in the LTP. I just wonder if that similar wording should be taken through into this one. I just wonder if we could make that as a note for you to consider.
Seek some advice on that. That's whether reference is made in the statement of intent about sealing unsealed roads, basically, or whether that's a long-term plan issue. Can I get some feedback from you on Councillor Sayers' suggestion?
Yeah. I understand the funding is still ring-fenced in the LTP, so if it's still ring-fenced there, I don't see a problem of...
And indeed, Councillor Sayers approached me with a comment about that, and I've raised it with Auckland Transport already and just awaiting their response on exactly how that's best incorporated into the next revision of the Statement of Intent.
Councillor Sayers will be very happy about that. Thank you.
So, Phil, just to clarify, so it will be something that you and Ross will consider? And with that extra feedback as well.
Take some advice on the response that you've got, Edward, from Auckland Transport, but as I heard it, there is it is still ring-fenced, but the question is whether that can be incorporated within the statement of intent.
That's right.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I mean, a lot of the things that have been said are good, and I do think we need to make it much clearer actually what AT are doing. I mean, when I look at that statement of intent, it doesn't mean anything to the general public or even me. It's just word, there's no actual projects that make you think something's going to happen. My issue, added on to the other people's comments, especially around town centre development, are that we've missed out private developers in there and AT's relationship with them, because we know that increasingly when Panuku are working with people, they'll be working with council, but they'll also be working with private developers. And I think that, and subsequently, AT will be involved in a lot of those developments, road connections, transport connections, all of those sorts of things. And I'd like to see much better relationships, not that, oh, it's a developer, let's, muck them around, because I think sometimes that happens. We actually have to have a much more land use and integrated, transport integrated plan, and I don't think that AT can just be, oh, we'll come along, we want to do it our way of doing stuff, rather than how do we do this together to get the best outcome for the public? Because that's who we're doing this for. Who the hell else are we doing? We're not doing it for AT. We're developing our town centres for people, and they've got to work, and there can be great master plans, and then sometimes AT will come along, no, we want to do it this way. And there's no argument, it just happens, and sometimes there are perverse outcomes, and they do a lot of good stuff as well, but just in my experience in the Northwest at the moment, it's not working. So I think we have to make sure that AT are really having good relationships with everybody, not just our departments, and we need to get the best outcomes from the big investment that we put in. Thank you.
Any comment from officials there?
I think if the rest of the council agrees with that, we can probably find a way of getting AT to commit to improved relationships with the private sector.
And sorry, can I just add to that? Because the reality is we're not going to do these developments. We know we don't have enough money to do it all. So this is the reality. We have to rely on the private sector. So we've got to have good relationships with them. And I'm not saying giving them everything they want, but we need to be fair and we need to work in together and across the whole spectrum, as well as with council. Not asking for special favours.
And not special relationships like former members of the Rodney District Council enjoyed when working for AT. Okay, Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, thanks staff for this. When I look at the LOE, it was quite exhaustive for this particular CCO, and I'm still trying to reconcile the key points of the LOE with the feedback that our staff have given us here in the document, the report here today. And I wouldn't mind if we have another look post this meeting just to make sure we've tracked that LOE really well, because I'm seeing a few gaps. So that's point. Look, I totally agree with the feedback that's provided by the staff. Roads and Streets Framework, mass transit projects focusing in that area, absolutely critical. How well we're doing in enhancing the bus network, absolutely critical. I just want to go through a few points, Mr Mayor, and then I will forward this to your office as well, but I need to say them quickly, otherwise I'll be eating up too much time. Point one is we need to note, and this is recorded in resolution, for Auckland Transport to expedite the transfer of surplus land assets to Panuku Development Auckland for regeneration and possible disposal. I think you've covered the emphasis on collaboration on the Auckland City Centre Master Plan, and then I gather any sort of new targets or measures about reducing traffic would actually have to be, that would have to be subject to LTP? That would be an LTP, not an SOI issue? So at the moment, there's no intention to reduce traffic.
Significant. I don't think there's any targets relating to city centre traffic numbers, particularly in the SOI or the LTP. And I think if we were to make sort of strategic changes to key outcomes, then the LTP is probably the best
park
place
it
to
for
do
LTP.
that.
Good. When we go to strategic themes, Mr Mayor, which is at page 75, you've got the current existing strategic themes, and then you go to a paragraph at the bottom on the revised strategic themes. And this is quite important. I read the existing and then I read the revised, and I could not understand the relationship between the two. It's not clear to me at all when you go to that paragraph on page 75, revised strategic themes, what has changed? One key one has changed, and the one that has changed is a critical one. The one that's been taken out is ensure a sustainable funding model and ... So for me, I'm in the dark on what the revised strategic themes mean. Are they suggesting that they're signalling that for the LTP? Because I would say that if it's revised strategic theme, that is a shift in direction that we need to be picking up through LTP. Can we just explain what's going on there, because it's grey?
I think it's fair to say we found that confusing too. And I
good.
think paragraph 35 kind of says that. And basically that we need to use one set of strategic themes, not two, and that if the new ones are to inform the 2018 LTP, then we should use the current ones, because this SOI most applies to the 17-18 year. And if we are going to change the strategic themes, that should be in my opinion at least, a joint discussion of council and Auckland Transport.
So the one is revised, Mr Mayor, that's been taken out, is ensure a sustainable funding model, which I just mentioned. I thought that was one of the biggest challenges of this council.
That is the biggest challenge, because without that you can't deal with any of the other strategic themes. So I think para 35 does signal that quite clearly, that we want this redone, and the themes need to be consistent with what we have in the long-term plan as well. I'm not sure why they have, if the board made this decision, why that wasn't a strategic theme. It's the overridingly important issue in this whole portfolio area.
Thank you. There are a few projects that are mentioned there which are reflective. This is forward-looking. Just get rid of the filler. It's nice to see some very successful projects done, but they're not relevant. Just on the work program, the 3-year work program, the way I read it, and I think you've covered it, but it's just very random. It's very hard to read it. You know, how does it respond to the big issues, the big capital spends, the big OPEX spends? And then there's a second tier, which I think also needs to, you know, those ones that actually speak to communities a bit more than our big RTN focuses, etc. I'll leave my paper to explain what I mean there, and won't go into that any further. We're into the 3rd year of the Accelerated Transport Program. I can't see anywhere here a clear reference as to where we're up to and what we've got to do in the final year of the Accelerated Transport Program, particularly, Mr Mayor, taking into account that it is that interim transport levy, final year of the ITL that we're utilising. We are behind. I can see it, we're behind in quite a few areas. It needs a clear articulation as to what the status of the Accelerated Transport Program delivered through the ITL is. It's not there at the moment. For example, page 81, that's me vibrating.
Must be painful.
I'll stop vibrating. So, on page 81, there's mention there of maintain momentum on the delivering the cycle program. If we maintained the momentum, we would fall further behind, because we are behind in the Accelerated Transport Program part, which is cycling. We are well behind. So I would suggest that we need to accelerate momentum on delivering the cycle program. But that's just an example, one example, and I'm sure there will be more, of where we're not fully aware of where we're up to on the Accelerated Transport Program. Rapid Transit Network, you've identified the themes I've covered. Also, in our letter of expectation, we asked them to outline the SOI quite specifically, detail around efficiency programs to drive down costs, create greater efficiency. Are you confident that that has been adequately reflected?
Not as the draft currently stands.
Right. Okay, so that's got to be picked up, Mr Mayor. I'll table these, but I think I'll probably go back to my very first comment. I think we need to reconcile again the LOE with what we've got back, because I'm still seeing maybe even more gaps than we've picked up today. Thanks.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive and very helpful. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris has covered some of my points, but I think, and it's probably responding a little bit to the public forum, David, we had around congestion, but I think we need to, and Auckland Transport needs to talk more about moving people as opposed to congestion or vehicle counts or the numbers of cars. So when we're using a corridor better to move people, there may be one lane that is still congested, but we're actually moving more people. Oniwa Road in my ward is one, that the general lane is always congested, but we're moving 70% of the humans in the transit lane and 30% of the vehicles, and we're increasing that whole space a lot because we've just added more double deckers to that, and we're adding more next month. So that's increasing numbers of people moving, but we may still see visible congestion, but we're actually moving people a lot more. So that's not really said in the statement of intent or our letter around that, and that's the same as the Northern Busway. The numbers of cars reduced over the Harbour Bridge, but people still see congestion, but we actually increase the number of people crossing the bridge by thousands and thousands. So that needs to be thought of more. We mentioned walking and cycling infrastructure in here, but I think we need to, once again, it's around that people, how can we use a corridor better? The city centre is one. If we focus on the number of people we're moving around in those spaces, we would actually automatically make the footpaths and things much wider and reduce the space when we have, one or two cars waiting in an intersection with, 200 people standing on the footpath. So if we put the focus on people being creative, it's mentioned there, but I think we do need to have Auckland Transport as focusing more on the urban development, kind of being creative in our town centres and seeing it more of a people space. It's in there a little bit, and around our plans, I think Auckland Transport's response was they're working with us on the Auckland plan refresh, but I think around Chris's point around the city centre master plan and the issues that have arisen from the Victoria Linear Park and things, if they need to be, Auckland Transport needs to be responding to all our plans, not just the Auckland plan refresh or the LTP, it's all our bodies of work. How can they respond correctly to what our vision is as a council, and then the transport has to come out of that. So it's not just about putting out something that they want to do that actually is completely opposite to not just what the Auckland plan says, but actually all our plans, the city centre master plan. The other thing is renewals. There's a mention of renewals and more clarity around that, but I think it might be too specific for something like a statement of intent maybe, but I think there's a lot of scope when assets are being renewed that they could be changed and upgraded based on the policies and directions we want. So wider footpaths are just done automatically, cycle lanes are done automatically, as opposed to us then asking for an extra capital project to go on top of that. So I don't know, that's probably more for the LTP maybe, but I think there's a way, because we already mentioned renewals in here, just to make it more updating, not just replacing like for like when actually the numbers of people and things using that space are a lot different. So that is all.
Thank you very much. Any further comment on that? Some of those reinforce the comments that Councillor Darby has made.
Just on the final point, Councillor, at the bottom of in my version, page 5, and paragraph 36, we have mentioned about checking for opportunities to improve walking and cycling amenity when renewals are done. So that might go some way to answering that one.
I think just on your point around shifting people, that's what the productivity measure is intended to measure. It's just probably still a bit difficult to understand, and whether we can capture the same point of congestion impact rather than congestion severity. So if a lot of people are able to avoid congestion, then we want to understand that. So that's part of the story of how we develop, I guess, a better congestion measure that both captures your point around, hey, if someone's not in congestion or I'm shifting a lot more people down a bus lane, that's a good thing, but it's not in a very complex productivity measure.
And the other thing is around travel times, just how that's seen also, because that can be misleading, because when I catch the bus in, it takes half an hour, but the exact same distance if I drive can take an hour. So my travel time is great if I actually use public transport, but if I have to drive, it's double the time. So we might not be able to change the travel time in my car, but I actually can. So that's how we show that.
It's also the trade-off between travel time and reliability is what's more important, a 20-minute trip that could be 40 minutes 10% of the time, or a 25-minute trip that's guaranteed 25 minutes. So it varies per person. I guess my point is it's quite complicated, and that's why we probably want to take the time through developing the LTP to do the measures properly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hulse.
Just two quick things, Mr Mayor. The challenge we've got here, I think, is exactly as Councillor Darby put it. We are kind of trying to schmooze this over, and we are indeed sort of looking backwards a little bit. I think the next one is the really important one. When we've done the Auckland Plan refresh, we know where we're heading, and we've also got the LTP, where hopefully we can turn some of this on its head, because this is very business as usual. I'm very keen that our next one reflects the congestion-free network, and I completely agree with Councillor Hills saying we need to be measuring the movement of people, not the movement of vehicles. So to that end, I just think we need greater clarity around the issue that Councillor Quack's raised, which was travel times. It's very useful having this table in here, but we need to make it quite clear that travel times will not reduce. Car travel times are not going to reduce in any way, nor should people expect them to, because that's simply not possible. But travel times will be more reliable by utilising public transport and alternatives. Just something I'd like us to signal is in the movement to of land and surplus land going to Panuku, I'd like us to signal somewhere that we need to be reviewing alternative funding mechanisms, and I think it's a time to signal and challenge Auckland Transport and Panuku around the idea of value uplift. We're creating huge wealth and value in people's adjacent properties when we put this infrastructure in. We simply need to garner some of that to use for further infrastructure. And just finally, I think figures are important. We do fling around an awful lot of information based on nothing, and I just do need to respond that at the workshop that we had with AT, they made it quite clear that it was internationally verified and independently verified that they had returned through their large events $44 million to the Auckland economy, and I don't know how councillors missed that figure when it was given to us. So figures are important. I think we need to make sure that they're the right figures in all our CCO's plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Mr Chairman. One of the problems with running it this way is that often it's a supplementary to something that was a little while ago. So I've got a few supplementaries to a few of the comments. Firstly, to Councillor Cooper, I agree with her entirely on the issue of how we try and give some weighting, if it's possible, Alistair, on partnerships. So we know historically that we've been able to achieve that. Sylvia Park was not built by council, it was built by Kiwi Investments. We can have more of those. There's another one proposed for Drury. That's fantastic. But I want to come back to Councillor Quack's and bring it back perhaps to Josh's response to him on getting that alignment. We all agree on it. We've debated it. But how do we get the real accountability measures, and how do we make them stick? And that is needing, I think, a lot more work. And we have to accept the things and the changes in the policies that we're doing at council, I mean, are going to impact on that. So you end up with wriggle room and people sort of being able to back away. And that's the point that I think Councillor Hulse is making. With 122 new residents every single day, we are not going to see on those arterial, the productivity, we can't just see these issues in isolation. So I don't want you to respond now, but I would like you to be able to give me some greater confidence. To me, the best measure of whether Auckland Transport is making progress is just going to Dominion Road. Dominion Road we haven't made a lot of progress on for a hell of a long time. But I can see, if we're going to come to the sorts of things that David expressed this morning and Councillor Quack's, last night there was a public meeting and your apologies were expressed at it, Your Worship. But, there's a new hotel development, 160-bed hotel on Dominion Road, and the development application has not one single car park even though they're going to have events, they've got a cafe. Now, that is yet, decisions are yet to be made on that, but all I'm trying to say here is we have to have meaningful assessments that can be measured, and that's the work, Josh, I'd like you to comment on. How are we going to hold that Board of Auckland Transport to account when on a daily basis the rules of the game are going to keep changing? So I'm putting that in a really clumsy way. I wanted to do it immediately after Councillor Quack's, but can you just give me a little bit of further insight on how we can get that alignment, how we can ensure that the letters of expectations are going to be meaningful and the congestion measures are going to reflect what is actually happening?